So, Paul, this episode's a little provocative. Is growth mindset dead?
Uh, it is provocative, yeah. And I think I'm not sure it's dead, but I think it might be struggling just a little bit inside quite a lot of companies. Lot of people latched onto it as a phrase. It sort of entered the business lexicon, but people that are deploying it fairly seriously inside their organizations are having some challenges.
Is that despite or in congruence with? I mean, I thought it was pretty solid, science based, right?
Yeah, well,
Ideally.
let's take a step back a little bit. So, for those that don't know, um, the term really was popularized by Carol Dweck in her work and her book about growth mindset. And the book defines it fairly clearly. I will sort of talk around it just a little, just a little bit right now. But basically, the idea is that there is the concept of a fixed mindset, and the antithesis of that is the growth mindset. So, a fixed mindset. Sometimes people call them know-it-alls, right? People who build up a body of knowledge, and then having built up a body of knowledge, become the person that knows everything, and then maybe they are generous and they share what they know with other people,
Yeah.
but they get to a point and they're locked. And then there is the concept of the growth mindset, whereby these people are not know-it-alls, they're learn-it-alls. They are constantly looking, constantly searching for opportunities to learn from others. They're constantly questioning.
Mm-hmm.
And they can be at any level inside the organization, including the very highest level of the organization. So Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, embraces this in terms of how he approaches almost every day. So to give you a sort of personal example on that, right? I was presenting at an executive briefing when I was working at Microsoft, and I was the second person presenting at the executive briefing, and the first person to be presenting, the person I was going immediately afterwards, was Satya Nadella. So he walked up to me, who at that time he had never met before, and introduced himself to me. Said, "Hi, I'm Satya." I said, "I know," and he then proceeded to ask me a series of questions that made it very clear to me and also to him that he was trying to learn from me.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, interestingly, people with a growth mindset are almost like parasitic in how they learn. They look at every opportunity from everybody to say,
Yeah.
okay, I could learn from you. I could learn from my Uber driver. I could learn from the person who's cleaning my house. I could learn from somebody I meet on the street.
Hmm.
And so they're doing that constantly because they're sponges and they're using it as an opportunity to grow. And then the other aspect of it as well that is very clear is this idea that if you do not do that, you're putting artificial limits on where you go.
Right.
And so you asked about how well built is, how well sort of science based it is. There's certainly elements of it that are science based. Some people would argue that there are elements of it that are more sort of like how you would want the world to be versus how they actually are.
Yeah.
But it's certainly powerful. It's a powerful concept, embraced by a number of CEOs, and it can be powerful for people that truly internalize it.
Yeah. But it can also be weaponized then too,
Yeah,
right? Right.
yeah,
And it's like, it's part of it as you describe it, right? It's almost like, wow, that's also introvert versus extrovert. Like, how do you
yeah.
feel about talking to people in that way and asking them all those questions and things like that? That's a whole personality trait versus whether you like to learn
Yeah,
or want to apply it too. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
yeah, that's true, Matt. Although that is, if you think about it, if you're more introverted, then that's just the example I gave is a methodology, right? A
Sure, sure.
methodology is, oh, I'm going to learn it all by virtue of like being social, right? That's
Right.
one. It's a very powerful way of doing it,
Yeah.
right? But the other way in which you could do that is just by pulling a whole bunch of information from a whole bunch of sources on the internet, for example. So there are
Right.
ways around that. But where we've seen this be a problem is not at the individual level. right? If you're an individual and you pick up Carol's book and you read through it and you say, hey, I want to apply the principles that are contained in this book, it's probably going to be very helpful for you.
Yeah.
Where we see the problem is at a team and at an organizational level. And I'm actually going to start with at the organizational level. So at an organizational level, let's say you say, hey, we're a growth mindset company, and you think that Carol's work's going to transform your company. Well, what do you think somebody with a fixed mindset does when they learn about growth mindset?
Dismiss it.
Precisely. Yeah. Like nothing, because they've got a fixed mindset, right? So if you truly have the fixed mindset that Carol's talking about, reading a book telling you that you shouldn't behave that way is not going to do anything. And so if you think about this as a bell curve, right, with people on a spectrum from like fixed mindset to true growth mindset, if you're really, really open to the ideas in Carol's book, if you love these ideas and you want to apply these ideas, you were kind of doing it anyway.
Right.
If they don't resonate with you, nothing's going to happen.
Right.
And so as a result, you're not actually really making any change. Maybe if the only barrier is a deeper understanding to how to implement some of these principles, and Carol's presenting this to you in a way that hasn't resonated with you before, maybe it's going to have some kind of impact. But in the vast majority of cases, it does not move people from where they are, because where they are defines how open they are to growth mindset in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And then you talked about this idea of it being weaponized, and that is really, really, really important. What we've seen at particularly at team levels within organizations, is managers will use this almost as a cudgel, right? They'll use it as a means of saying, I want you to do X. And then if you disagree with me saying that you should do X, then I'm now accusing you of not exhibiting a growth mindset. And I'm potentially using that as a means of pushing you back or pushing you down, because the organization has said this is massive. This is now part of our culture. Right. So this is a value on which I'm supposed to determine how valuable you are, but I'm the one making that judgment.
Yeah.
So it only works if, ironically, it doesn't really help anybody move to a growth mindset, and it only really works if the people that are judging other people's growth mindset have themselves a growth mindset.
Right.
And so it's kind of an instantiation of that phrase that you sometimes hear, which is like, middle managers is where culture goes to die. Yeah. This is sort of one of those instantiations of that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. So it's just kind of empty in some ways. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think the idea of severance we talked about before, is kind of fascinating in this too. Like you could, the idea that you could just turn everybody into this thing isn't really reality once you get to the team level. It's fascinating. It is a good buzzword though. It does seem better than fixed, right? So where do you go? What do you really want if it's not that black and white then?
Well, and I think there's another issue here which is related to, which I think it's possibly slightly out of date, this concept of constant growth. I think what actually needs to replace it is something that is framed around the way that world of work is changing right now. And so if you want to talk mindset, that's great, but really an adaptability mindset is the way that people should really be thinking about this, right? So it's not so much I grow as an individual. It is the world of work is changing, and my superpower needs to be adaptability. And so part of that is skill, but alongside that, part of that is mindset, right? Then an acknowledgement, understanding that the way I approach work today is going to be different to the way I approach work tomorrow. And we'll talk about that a lot more, I think, in some of the future episodes.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm like picturing this imagery, like where it starts to break down in my head, where like if growth is the only idea, right? And think about it like like a tree, right? So a tree If the growth mindset is on the tree, that means the tree just needs to keep going up and up and up and up. Eventually it'll get taller and wider. But what if it's can't go up and it needs to go sideways or down or spread wider or fill an area, right?
You got it.
It's adaptability. Figure out your circumstances. Yeah.
Fluxgum, we're out of time, Matt.
All right.
That was
Thanks,
a good
Paul.
one.
Yeah.
See ya.